Thank you for joining us for tonight's program, Keeping It Real, Insights on Real-World Lens Care Challenges. We are excited to have Dr. Crystal Breimer and Dr. Christopher Levens as our speakers this evening. Dr. Crystal Breimer is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill and Southern College of Optometry. She has a private practice background delivering full-scope optometric care in Wilmington, North Carolina for 13 years with special interests in contact lenses and dry eye management. Dr. Breimer enjoys speaking and writing for optometrists and allied ophthalmic professionals on both practice management and disease management topics. She is also the owner of Crystal Vision Services, an ophthalmic equipment and practice management consulting company. Dr. Christopher Levens is the Chief of Staff at the Eye Center at Southern College of Optometry. He holds the academic rank of Associate Professor. Dr. Levens has been employed in private practice and ophthalmology referral center, and he served in the United States Air Force. He was a Chief of Aerospace Optometry at the Pentagon before joining SCO. Dr. Levens has published scientific research and has lectured on topics dealing with eye disease, contact lens solutions, and optometric management. Dr. Levens is the co-creator of the fundoscopic grading card. He is also a peer reviewer for 6 optometric and ophthalmologic journals. Dr. Levens was the former Tennessee State Consultant on Healthy Eyes, Healthy People, and was Southern College of Optometry's representative to the American Optometric Association. He is currently on the Part 3 Council of the National Board of Examiners in Optometry. Dr. Levens has a master's degree in health administration. Dr. Breimer and Dr. Levens, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. The goal of tonight's webinar is to update you on the information that the FDA has released regarding potential interactions between lenses and solutions, and to look at how this might influence the current protocol they have in place for product approval, but also how it might influence us in our offices, the standards that we have for maintaining patient compliance. As early as 2001, we saw data presented by Rosenthal that showed that PHMB was rendered ineffective during lens storage. This was the first red flag, indicating that a solution's efficacy in the bottle may differ from its efficacy in a lens case in the presence of a lens. Yet, no one really did anything with this information. Nothing changed. 5 years later, V&L recalled Renew with Moisture Lock after the fusarium outbreak. There were 181 confirmed cases. 1 year and 10 days later, AMO recalled Complete Moisture Plus after the acanthamoeba outbreak. Patients were 7 times more likely to have an acanthamoeba keratitis if they had been using this product. This was a scary time. It was a scary time for patients, for doctors, and for the industry, because we trusted these products that were on the market, and they were failing us. And when the plants were investigated, it was clear that the downfall was not in the manufacturing process. The products were coming off the line at full capacity, but when they were actually being used by real patients in the real world, something was happening, and the patients were no longer protected as they needed to be. And with 2 major recalls so close together that were connected to such significant vision-threatening events, it made patients and doctors alike leery of everything at this point. Even so, nothing really changed, other than those 2 products being pulled from the market. After conducting internal investigations, in 2012, the FDA acknowledged flaws in their current testing protocols, and they proposed revision of the testing standards used for product approval. So where does that leave us now? It's our hope that in 2013 that we as practitioners will focus more on strategies to handle real-world issues associated with contact lens wear, that will take more responsibility in how our patients are wearing and caring for their lenses, to actively make recommendations, but then to follow up, even with our established wearers, to ensure that they're compliant in how they wear their lenses and how they care for their lenses. In 2012, in November, the FDA released 11 articles in a peer-reviewed journal, The Eye and Contact Lens, and they included 3 editorials, 5 internal studies, and 3 studies from outside sources. We're going to concentrate on the 3 internal investigations that related specifically to lens and solution interactions. The 4th one you see here is one of the editorials, and it discusses the need for change in the current FDA protocol, partially due to the results of these 3 studies. So to cut to the chase and sum up their conclusions, they said that uptake and release of a solution's disinfectant could be problematic. that there's reduced disinfection over time with certain lens and solution combinations, and that additional test requirements are being evaluated to create a more real-world environment by incorporating a lens into the protocol so they're not just testing the efficacy of the solution alone, but the efficacy in a real-world scenario in the presence of a lens and in the presence of a lens case. Chris, before we go into current protocol that the FDA is using, can you give us a little more background on exactly what happened during those outbreaks and the momentum that it caused?
I sure will. Thanks, Crystal. As you mentioned, 2 international outbreaks of sight-threatening keratitis motivated the FDA to sponsor the research that we're actually talking about this evening and this afternoon. These outbreaks were so unusual that it's imperative for us to not forget the past and give some renewed perspective on those 2 historic events. So if you don't mind, let's flash back in time a bit to early 2006. I personally recall being at SECO that year at the time when news reports from the Far East were released suggesting a link between fungal keratitis and Bausch & Lomb's multipurpose solutions. To say this was surprising is to say not a lot at all. This was shocking. Shortly thereafter, cases were identified in the U.S. Our colleagues were on the national news, on Good Morning America, on the evening news programs. Who would have predicted that an issue with a contact lens disinfection solution would lead to a fungal keratitis? That link was astonishing. What was additionally alarming about this was the unfortunate doctors left to initially care for these patients. Think for yourself. When I think to myself, I can put my place in the position of the doctors at that time. Before 2006, when would the differential diagnosis of fungal keratitis even come to mind? That was for a patient who had been hiking maybe and was scratched by a tree branch. Maybe somebody mowing the lawn and something flew up and hit the eye. A certain or highly suspect vegetative insult was key to the case history, leading someone down the thought path of fungal keratitis. But in these cases, unfortunately, this case history was non-existent. So what resulted in some of these cases was a often misdiagnosis, a probable unfortunate delay in the eventual correct diagnosis, and a corresponding delay in the appropriate treatment. As surprising as the events were in 2006, the ophthalmic industry shook in reaction. Contact lens fitters and care providers began to immediately take note. There was a newfound focus on contact lens care and disinfection. And then the unthinkable happened again, as Crystal keenly mentioned. Lightning struck again. So what we see here is from the first outbreak of Fusarium keratitis. And as she mentioned, just past 1 year later, we found ourselves in a very similar predicament. Researchers in the Chicagoland area identified a link between a new outbreak of acanthamoeba and yet another contact lens disinfection solution. Now AMO's Complete Moisture Plus was recalled from market. Parallel to the fungal outbreak, we were stunned and caught off guard completely again. And it takes me back once more to the interview process. We weren't interviewing patients presenting with a red eye who claimed to have been swimming in their lenses or in lake water or in the hot tub with their lenses. There was none of this. Again, same story, same patient cases. They were unfortunately all too easy to misdiagnose and incorrectly treat. So how can this happen? How did this happen? What can we do today? What can our industry partners do today to not let this happen again? So we've had some time to reflect. And it occurs to me as you look here, there are many individuals and many organizations that have roles and responsibilities for our patient safety. So I like to think of these folks and groups as a multi-linked chain, where any breach or break in the chain can lead to problems. The FDA reviews research protocols and results in various stages with the goal of assuring that products that come to market are safe for patient use or patient consumption. The FDA relies on entities like ANSI and ISO who create standards and testing methodologies to identify safety concerns. In order for our industry partners to bring novel and improved products to market, they have to comply with these methods of testing to deliver their manufactured formulations to our practices and our patients. Now, once items can be prescribed to patients by eye care providers, now we take a place in this. Our considerations have to be appropriately made to determine our patient's eye's health, the eye's status, and the eye's conditions. In terms of lens care, compliance and solution recommendations are of key importance. This chain cannot be complete with actually including the lens wearer or customer as well. We intend for them to adhere to our recommendations, to regular examinations, to the instructions of their doctors, and the instructions of the products they're using. As you can see, there are a lot of opportunities for problems in this whole chain. If any link is out of place or one goes astray, problems can result.
Chris, that's a great point. A lot of patients don't even remember what solution they use. And if they aren't committed enough to remember it, they're certainly not buying it consistently. So I think an important first step in ensuring compliance is to find out what they're doing now. And I'd like to hear from everyone online which method they use to determine what solution a patient is using. And be honest, because no one will see what you choose. So, how do you uncover which contact lens solution your patient is currently using? Ask the patient, have them point to a bottle in the office, use a picture chart with examples of the solutions on it, or have them bring in their current solution with them to the exam, or something else.
And here are the results that we're looking at. Ask the patient, 40% responded. Have them point to a bottle in the office, 10% responded. Use a picture chart with examples of the solutions on it, 20%. Another 20%, Crystal, replied, have them bring their current solution with them to the exam, and then 10% have other ideas. What do you usually do?
I usually have them bring it with them to the exam. It works very well. There's no question of what they're doing. Now, granted, everybody doesn't do it, so it's not foolproof. What do you do?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, those of you who mentioned here use a picture chart with examples on it. Alcon has a chart in that vein if you're interested. I think a pretty standard approach is to bring something with them, because if the patient replies in a certain way, it's hard to assume that they're replying to an answer that they believe you want to hear. And sometimes they may be, quite frankly, mistaken in what they think they're using compared to what they're really using. One of the things that I've begun doing recently, given the high-tech technology that most patients carry with them every day, is I encourage my patients to take a picture of their solution with their smartphones and to store it in their photo app so that they can always recall back to it when it comes time for them to go to the store and actually pick something up.
That's a great idea. You're a lot more creative than I am.
Okay, so let's bring the past to the current. As we move forward in time, several things have happened in the past 6 years. More research has been done. Many continuing education lectures have been delivered. Pundits and experts have dissected the issues of 2006 and 2007 to provide their key perspectives. Crystal, as you mentioned, the FDA stepped in and held a workshop and panel meeting specifically to facilitate opinions and ideas on this topic. Silicone hydrogels came to market. Remember, silicone took years for science to be able to produce this material in a soft lens with the intrinsic benefits that silicone affords. It is just a very challenging component to deal with. Dual disinfection, multi-purpose solutions were introduced. And the FDA sponsored research to identify the issues related to lens solution misinteractions and include proposals for real-world testing, which is primarily the topic that we are covering tonight. So in terms of your practices out there, I think it's a great question to ask how it has changed in your office. So here's another question. How have your practices changed? Please answer. A, nothing has really changed as a result of these events. B, I spend more time educating patients on proper lens wear and care. C, I have taken extra time to understand the science of the different lens care formulations. And answer D, both B and C.
Chris, one thing it did for me was to serve as a wake-up call, that these are medical devices and very complex formulations, and which combination I choose, it does make a difference. And because of that, it caused me to try and understand more about what's in the bottle, and then be adamant in my recommendations and in my follow-up, making sure that they're actually doing what I asked them to do. So for me, I would say B and D.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. There was really a time in which I didn't consider at all which contact lens disinfection system was best for my patients. I intentionally or unintentionally implied that they were all adequate. Some had more attributes than others, but I presumed that they were all safe products. I didn't learn until later that this may not be the case. So I began to spend a lot more time with my contact lens patients emphasizing compliance with wear schedules, compliance with cleaning methods, and making very specific recommendations for lens care systems. No longer did I just reach in my dispensing closet of sample solution kits blindly. Like you, Crystal, I now started to make these decisions with a purpose, clear intent, and then that's really where I still am today.
And I want us to revisit that question too after we look at the actual results from the FDA studies. And before we think about potential changes to FDA protocol, let's look at what they have in place right now. Currently, a solution can gain FDA approval via two different methods. However, there is a difference in the labeling of the product according to which criteria they meet. So if they meet the primary criteria, the product is labeled as an MPDS, or a multi-purpose disinfection solution. But if they only meet the secondary criteria, which has reduced standards, then they're labeled as an MPS, or a multi-purpose solution. The primary criteria is what we're going to focus on, and it's a standalone disinfection test, meaning that the solution efficacy is tested straight from the bottle, in a test tube, without the presence of a lens. It requires a 3 log unit reduction against each of the bacteria tested, and then a 1 log unit reduction against molds and yeast. So keep that in mind as we progress through this. Here's a visual of that same protocol. We see the horizontal bars that represent the FDA criteria, the 3 log unit reduction for each bacteria on the left, and the 1 log unit reduction for yeast and mold in the middle. And on the right, we see the solution's efficacy against acanthamoeba. Currently, there's no FDA protocol in place, but that's one of the things that they propose to change. You see here that we're comparing 3 different solutions, and it's the 3 that you likely have in your office. And each of them met the FDA criteria. They stood up to the test. They crossed that line. But if we think back to Renew with Moisture Lock or AMO Moisture Plus, we know that if they were on the market at that time, they crossed that line too. They met the FDA criteria, yet when they were challenged in the real world and they were faced with non-compliant patients, they failed. And I think that causes us to look at this with a new perspective and to see that maybe there's something missing from this FDA criteria. There's more to it than crossing that line. There's more to it than what can be tested in a test tube. Because where it really counts is in the presence of a lens in a case. This is an excellent visual as to what can happen to the disinfectant in the presence of a lens. The contact lens is a porous material, and certain disinfectants can be taken up into that lens. And of course, this is a complex, multifaceted process, dependent on the pore size or the water content of the lens, the ionicity of the lens, and also the chemical makeup of the disinfectant, the particle size, molecular weight, polarity. So we don't know exactly what influences that uptake, but we know that when the disinfectant is taken up into the lens, it decreases the disinfectant levels in the solution, which may diminish antimicrobial effectiveness. So what does the data say about uptake? In 2001, Rosenthal presented data showing that Renew Multi Plus demonstrated a loss of antimicrobial activity when tested under stress conditions. In 2004, Danley looked at the effect of contact lens storage on 5 different solutions, and she concluded that in 4 out of 5 of the solutions, the active component was sufficiently reduced or inactivated by contact lens storage that it was rendered ineffective against the bacteria tested. OptiFree Express was the only solution to maintain full efficacy. And in 2007, Warburton looked at the efficacy of Alexidine against Fusarium after soaking with different lenses. And you see here that Alexidine was significantly reduced for all lenses, polymacin less than others. So while these studies were done by different researchers in different environments, their results were very similar. One of the particular strengths of the FDA-sponsored research is that for all 3 studies, the methodology was exactly the same. So Chris, can you walk us through that study protocol, and then we'll get into the results?
Sure will, Crystal. Thanks for reviewing those publications. Great job. Those studies that you just mentioned really parallel and actually hint at the FDA's sponsored findings that were just released in November 2012. In that issue of eye and contact lens, there were 4 published articles that we will discuss shortly. Though somewhat of an unusual approach by the FDA, in light of what shocked our profession, they felt it prudent to take these steps. Fortunate for us, we now have the results. The focus of these studies was to make an attempt to bring real-world testing to the analysis of solution efficacy. Even thus far, Crystal and I have used the term real-world a few times already. Crystal most eloquently described the current methodology, criteria, and standards that contact lens disinfection solutions must pass to come to market. She also described previous research suggesting that adding a lens to the mix can complicate matters. It may seem foreign to us now that the lens has never been directly involved in the approval process for the solutions that it intends to be disinfected by. But as unorthodox as it may seem, that is how it has always been. With the analogy, if it ain't broke, don't fix it in mind, well, maybe it is broke, and so we should examine what was done. Most simply put, the FDA-sponsored research directly aimed at testing some solutions with a contact lens involved. And they published their opinion on establishing safeguards for future contact lens care products. So let's walk through the process, because it is a little bit complex. I'm going to walk you through the methodology for these studies. So the diagram on this slide will help me describe to you the process. 2 projects looked at the disinfection effect of a multi-purpose solution on staph and one on Fusarium. A multi-purpose solution containing PHMB was purchased locally, was tested in 2 of the studies. The 3rd study examined the efficacy of a multi-purpose solution containing POLYQUAD and ALDOX. Multiple types of soft contact lenses were used in these challenges. HEMA lenses were used, silicone hydrogel lenses were used. All lenses were a -3 lens for consistency's sake. New polypropylene cases were used to aseptically insert the lenses in triplicate. Using one of the PHMB studies as an example to walk through the process, here it essentially is. So on the upper left of this slide, you see the contact lenses with CL in the mix. So you see a contact lens was aseptically inserted in those lenses. Sterile pipettes were then used to instill 3 milliliters of the PHMB multipurpose solution to each lens well. But since, honestly, patients can store and disinfect their lenses at their own determined time intervals, these studies included several different time soaks in their analysis. So as you can see there in the small print, subsequent analyses of soaks were investigated that were 6 hours, 12 hours, 24, 72, and 168-hour soaks. 6-hour soaks were the minimum, as that is the labeled disinfection time. So please direct your attention again to the upper left of this slide. You'll see the lens cases with the lenses and their soaks. After that time elapsed, depending on which investigation was ongoing, the lenses were then removed and discarded. The solutions from all the polypropylene cases were pooled, and 10 milliliters was then removed from the pool for biocidal efficacy testing and PHMB level measurements. 1 milliliter of the solution was transferred to broth, again placed in triplicate, and then incubated. Colonies of staph, or if it was the fusarium test, were then counted and log reductions quantified. At the same time, for comparison with the same study design, this process was mimicked without the lenses. In other words, just the polypropylene case. So look at the darker green middle of this slide for this. For a second control in this carefully constructed study, bottle controls were also tested without the presence of a lens or a lens case. And you'll see that on the right side of this slide. The biocidal efficacy and activity and the PHMB levels were compared at every time interval. So that's a lot to take in. So to summarize, 3 milliliters of multipurpose solution was used in multiple lens case wells. One control for this study was cases without lenses to compare to the test case with lenses. Solutions were subsequently pooled with 10 milliliters removed for analysis. Solutions were inoculated and log reductions then measured. Fresh out-of-the-bottle solution was the second case control and was also inoculated for comparison's sake. The design did take into account ISO 14729, but adjustments had to be made since we were now using lenses in the mix. As we've talked about, they have not been used in this process before. Before Crystal shares the results of the FDA-sponsored work, it is prudent to recognize the limitations of research, this research, and just research in general. Realize that all research has limitations and all research has flaws. The best research succeeds at minimizing these flaws as much as possible. Nevertheless, you are all careful practitioners, and you should always be aware of minor research flaws before making an attempt to absorb the results. These studies that we're talking about this evening were all done in vitro. No human eyes were involved, and the lenses were not previously worn. Only one solution containing PHMB and one solution containing POLYQUAD ALDOX was tested. Any effect that the packaging solution, in the contact lens blister pack, those were not analyzed. Any effect there was not addressed. Any biocide uptake into the lens itself was not directly quantified, nor patterns examined. This uptake was rather presumed, since if it is no longer efficacious or quantifiable in solution, the presumption is the active components went into the lens themselves. That being noted, nevertheless, these findings are still very noteworthy and very stirring. All that has been said thus far has been leading us to the results. So, Crystal, would you please begin to share these results with the group?
Okay. I'm waiting for a drum roll. So the first FDA-sponsored study we look at was done by Charles Clavet. He evaluated the efficacy of a PHMB solution against fusarium after soaking with 8 different lenses for 6 different soak times. And they concluded that over time, the disinfectant uptake by some lenses can significantly reduce the PHMB concentration and the fungicidal activity of the MPS against fusarium. And when you look at the individual results of this study, you find that in regards to the PHMB concentration, after soaking with 3 of the 8 lenses there was a greater than 50% reduction in the PHMB, and that was within the 6-hour soak period. And keep in mind that 6 hours is the manufacturer's recommended soak time for the solution they were using. And in 2 of those, the PHMB concentration was at or below detection after the 12 and 72-hour soak, respectively. Now, in regards to the efficacy of the residual solution against fusarium, after soaking with 7 out of 8 of the lenses, the residual solution failed to obtain a 1 log unit reduction. Again, after a 6-hour soak, which is the recommended soak time for this product, yet for 7 out of 8 of the lenses, 6 hours was long enough to reduce the efficacy in a significant way. After a 24-hour soak with 3 of the 8 lenses, the residual solution had lost all or nearly all of its fungicidal activity. So that's a big impact. And again, where is this going to have the biggest impact? The results of our study demonstrate that consumers using PHMB-containing contact lens solution and exhibiting poor contact lens hygiene, such as reuse or extended soak times, may reduce the fungicidal activity of these solutions. So especially in our non-compliant patients, those who reuse or extend their soak time. The second FDA-sponsored study was led by Megan Schaaf, and she looked at the efficacy of a PHMB solution against staph after soaking with 8 different lenses for 6 different soak periods. So again, the same methodology as before, and they concluded that the efficacy of a multipurpose solution was affected by some lens materials and PHMB concentration. Over time, some lens materials can significantly reduce the PHMB concentration and the solution's microbial activity against Staph aureus. That's impactful. In this particular study, after soaking with 5 of the 8 lenses, there was a statistically significant reduction in PHMB concentration and a statistically significant correlation between the PHMB concentration levels and the log kill for staph. So the higher the PHMB levels were associated with higher log kills. The results of this study underscore the importance of testing the compatibility of multipurpose solutions, particularly those containing PHMB. Megan Schaaf also looked at the efficacy of a POLYQUAD ALDOX solution against staph after soaking with 7 different lenses for 6 different soak times. So to be clear, it was the same FDA researcher from the last staph study, and it was the same methodology that was used. The only difference was that she used 7 lenses instead of 8. So the one that was left off was a hydrogel lens. It's really a minor detail. So the lens materials did not alter the active ingredient levels. Her conclusion was that the efficacy of the multipurpose solution was affected by some lens materials and PHMB concentration. So with this third study done by Megan Schaaf, she compared the efficacy of a POLYQUAD ALDOX against staph. And the results of this study differed significantly from the other 2. Her results were as follows. The concentration of POLYQUAD and ALDOX remaining in the lens case is reduced only slightly over time. Storage with the lenses did not adversely affect the biocidal efficacy of the solution, and in some cases it was significantly better. So the lens materials did not alter the active ingredient levels, and there was no case of decreased efficacy against staph. In fact, with every single lens tested, the efficacy against staph was better after soaking with the lenses compared with the control. And it continued to improve over time in all but 1 lens. So at this point, you should be questioning, how could this happen? In the paper, Schaaf says that potentially some lenses preferentially absorb other preservatives in the solution that may have inhibited the antimicrobial activity, resulting in an increased antimicrobial activity of the solution after soaking. So there are other components that can be absorbed into the lens. However, this study did not look at the effect of uptake of the other components in the solution. It only looked at the uptake of the particular disinfectant being studied. So Chris, talk more to us about other areas like this that could lead to future research projects, or that the FDA it drew their attention even though they were not directly studying it.
Sure thing, Crystal. Again, fantastic job of summarizing the key take-home points there. When I, like you, read the remainder of the papers, I picked up a few additional points that the authors intended to make. In the discussion sections, points were made not from their actual study, but in their background research of the topic at hand. It is worthwhile to reiterate that the FDA's work was performed in vitro. No in vivo or ex vivo testing was performed. The FDA noted several areas of concern that may be relevant based on the conclusions of their research. The FDA merely noted these areas and came to no conclusions concerning these subjects. However, they still may be areas of interest to eye care practitioners like ourselves and to those interested in avenues of potential future research. The results of our study demonstrate that consumers using PHMB containing contact lens solutions and exhibiting poor contact lens hygiene, such as reuse or extended soak times, may reduce the fungicidal activity of these MPSs. That was a quote from Charles Clavitt from his paper on Fusarium. There is also opportunity to measure the concentrations of active components in other multipurpose solutions. We can measure the concentrations retained on or in the soaked lenses. Further, we can test all the other pathogens on the ISO 14729 panel. These were opportunities for future research, not specifically studied in these papers, but certainly mentioned and identified in these papers. While not tested, the FDA's papers authors noted other areas for future research, and we should discuss those as well. And I'm going to provide you with a few quotes and then explain where the quotes came from. First quote, "It is still clear from these experiments that some lens materials do interact with PHMB, which has been supported both in the literature and in our other experiments." This was quoted from Schaaf's paper on a PHMB solution. She cited the original work from Rosenthal in 1997 and 2006, Clavitt's 2009 and 2011 work, and Warburton's 2007 work. Next quote, "Pritchard et al. Compared one MPS containing POLYQUAD with two PHMB-based solutions and found significantly more corneal staining with PHMB solutions when used in conjunction with alpha Filcon A lenses." This is a quote from Clavitt's paper with the original source being Pritchard in 2003 that was published in Contact Lens Anterior Eye. Another concern is the potential for corneal epithelial cell damage and loss as a result of the subsequent release of the biocide, PHMB, onto the ocular surface once the lenses are placed back into the eye. This is a quote from Charles Clavitt in his paper on Fusarium. And finally, corneal epithelial cell loss or damage provides a breach through which microbes may enter. This is a quote from Clavitt's paper with the original source being Ide's published work in Eye and Contact Lens 2008. We've done our best to digest this independent government-sponsored work, and after thinking about this for some weeks now, I honestly really feel ready and prepared to take an even greater responsibility and hopefully control over my patients' habits. I'm really truly committed to consider and understand how lenses and lens care systems work together. I really treat these now like marriages, which can act together in harmony to bring us quiet and continued healthy eyes. The converse is really not acceptable to me. Some marriages just don't work out despite their best intentions in life, and I treat lenses and multi-purpose solutions with the same considerations. So because of that, I take the issue of lens care more seriously today than I ever have before. I spend a little bit of extra time explaining the whys and the whats to my patients. So why are they to follow my instructions? What are they to do? What are they not to do? And what the potential consequences are if they go astray. I believe this extra time and education on my part goes a long way to help them internalize my recommendations. Do you agree with that, Crystal?
Absolutely. If it seems important to us, it will seem important to them, and they're more likely to do something about it. And one specific area that we can really step up is to monitor the solution and the solution usage of our contact lens wearers. If a patient is a full-time wearer changing their solution daily, they should go through a bottle of solution per month. And that's without doing the 5-second stream that the insert tells them to do. However, market research shows us that the average full-time wearer is actually purchasing only 3.4 bottles a year, or 34 ounces. And this number has actually dropped a little bit each year. We can't make them buy 12 bottles a year, but we can ask them, how much solution do you go through in a month? Oh, well, tell me how you're cleaning your lenses. And use that as an opportunity to educate our patients on lens care. Even our established wearers, because I find that they're the ones who cut corners the most, because they feel like, well, so far, there haven't been any negative consequences from doing so. So educate your contact lens wearers on lens care. What does that really mean? I think it means making sure they know exactly what you want them to do. And in respect to that, what do you, as an audience, feel like patients value more? Do you think it's the free sample, or do you think it's a recommendation? So if you'll answer this question, which do patients prefer more, a free lens care sample over a recommendation, a lens care recommendation over a free sample, or they have no preference?
This is a really interesting question, Crystal. I'm glad that you put this up. Value-mindedness is really key when it comes to the customer and consumer, and the patient for that matter, in this new millennium. There are economic challenges all around us in our areas and our practices, and they're really beginning to put the focus squarely on value. What the patient values of us, their eye care practitioners, is now critically important, and maybe more important than ever. Hopefully everyone had success on their computers making an attempt to answer this. Well,
there we go.
Here we go.
So 53.8%.
Really
yeah, that's great. So you guys think 53% of patients, or 53% of you think that the patient wants the sample over the recommendation, and 30% say otherwise. And 15% say that they don't care. Because you know what? When patients were surveyed, 51% said they would forego their free sample in exchange for a direct recommendation. 51%, that surprised me, because basically what they're asking for is just an explanation of what to use and why. And they said that's more important to them than what's in that little box. And when I talk to colleagues, most doctors say they give out kits for every single contact lens patient. But again, when patients were surveyed, less than a third of them said they received a specific recommendation. So we hand out a kit every time, and we may think we're giving a recommendation with it, but in fact it may not be perceived that way by the patient. And if that's the case, then we may be leaving them unsatisfied, because at least half of them are looking for that recommendation. Granted, the other 49%, they want what's in the box, but 51% want the recommendation, and they value it above the sample. So I try to make sure that every patient knows exactly which solution I want them to buy. I tear off the top of the box, I hand it to them, tell them to put it in their wallet, because this is what I want you to buy. And honestly, if we're going to commit to making a firm recommendation, then it's important that we know what differentiates the product, that we know the science behind it, the disinfectants that are in each solution, and that we consider the interactions that could potentially occur.
As we're starting to close up, it's important to remember that these studies, again, have limitations, and not for us to generalize across solutions. But for reference, the PHMB preservative-based solutions are noted on the left side of this slide. Most store-branded solutions carry the PHMB component. There's also BioTrue, Renew Fresh, Renew Sensitive, and Complete Easy Rub that contain PHMB. Aquify, noted there, does as well, but as you can see below that, it will be discontinued later this year. We, again, do not know which of the POLYQUAD ALDOX multi-purpose solutions was specifically tested and used in the FDA study, but there are 3 Opti-Free brands that are used in combination, in that combination, which are Opti-Free Pure Moist, Opti-Free Replenish, and Opti-Free Express. Hydrogen peroxide is still an option for lens care disinfection, and those options are on the right of the slide in the rightmost column, and they are Clear Care, Aosept, and Oxycept.
So we are going to open it up for anybody who has questions. You can type those in, and then we will close.
Looks like you have one question.
Let's take a look. Yeah, let's take a look at what we've got. One question was, were there other papers included in the publication? So in the November 2012 edition of Eye and Contact Lens, they published 11 total papers. There were 5 internal investigations, 3 external investigations, and 3 editorials. And as far as the topics for the other papers, it varied. One of them talked about setting standards for acanthamoeba. One talked about lens grouping systems and just other safeguards against issues with contact lenses and care products. And also one was about material properties that predict preservative uptake. And there was one on heating units. So they covered a lot of territories, but it's surfaced around the idea of the interactions between lenses and lens care systems. And again, there was an editorial that kind of summed it all up and said, okay, there's changes that need to be made. Let's see.
Here's another question, Crystal. And it's about a question to ask docs in general. If they were only allowed to do one thing, which would be hand out a sample or make a recommendation, which would they choose? And naturally I can't answer for everyone, but I would presume that most doctors and most that I work with would probably pick the latter if that was their only choice. Here's really where the challenge is in lens care. These are still consumer products that the customer goes to the grocery store or the pharmacy or the mega store, and we leave it to them to follow our recommendations. And so you made some great suggestions, Crystal, about how you try to get people to remember which one to pick. And I try to emphasize why they should pick what they pick. But again, in the end, it's still their choice. Just the handing off of a sample is somewhat passive, whereas making a recommendation is far more active. And so if we were left with one opportunity, I think doctors are in the business of educating. They're in the business of making recommendations for continued health and hopefully permanent health and long-time successful uncomplicated wear. And so again, though I can't answer for everyone, I think most would buy into that analogy that recommendations really are key.
Absolutely. And Chris, honestly, I'm already impressed by the initiative that everyone online has taken just by being a part of this, because if you're here tonight in this webinar, it means that you know that what we do in our office makes a difference in the well-being of our patients, even when a lot of that responsibility lies on them. I don't see any other questions. Do you? I hope that you know that we greatly appreciate you being with us tonight. And these FDA papers are dense. We read through them many, many times, and each time there was brand new information that stood out. So I challenge you, get your hands on these papers, whether it's the full version or the abstract, and just dig in. You will learn a lot, and it will change your perspective on how you prescribe your lenses and what you do in recommending lens care to go with them. Any closing thoughts, Chris?
Nope, I 100% agree. I encourage everyone to get online, find these articles, find the journal, read through the entire journal, or focus on these, because there are really some important take-home points that affect most of us as optometrists who fit contact lenses every single day. It really hits us squarely in what we do. And so I really do thank everyone for attending. I know we have busy lives, and it's great that you're really trying to improve your skills as an optometrist by always learning more and embracing lifelong learning. So thanks for all you do.
Thank you.